Roll 'em, Lester.
So, happy Mother's Day. And I have to take my hat off to Reverend Michael. He always does what he can to provide information so that people have a sense about what's going to be happening. I very seldom actually give him a title, and he'll put together a title for me. The notion of today, Mother's Day, comes together with this month's theme, which is how to use spiritual guidance and how to let that still small voice empower us to take responsibility. So really today's talk is about mother stories and how those mother stories inform our response to that still small voice. Now, oftentimes we are not given direct instruction about how to engender the still small voice or how to respond to the still small voice. Sometimes that still small voice pops up and we don't have the faintest idea what to do in response. So, in many ways, I think that the stories of motherhood, and there are so many of them, help inform us both about how to listen to that voice and how to respond effectively. So how do we listen well and how do we respond effectively? Because responding effectively is really what it means to take responsibility. That we are able to respond to whatever comes in front of us. And ultimately, in many ways, that's what the story of motherhood falls into. In the early ages, when people started putting together stories of the gods and goddesses, mothers were frequently victims of circumstances. Because there was a time when women were just treated awfully. Now we know that that's stopped, and that now women are just held up at such high ways. Maybe not. Maybe there is still a way that women are not acknowledged. And there are parts of all of us that are not acknowledged. So one of the stories of motherhood is the ability to overcome overwhelming odds. Again, I think back to some of the oldest stories. You hear about the genesis of creation. And oftentimes, the mother has gone through terrible ordeals. For example, in the stories of the Greek gods, Gaia, who was the Mother Earth, was really attacked by the sky. It wasn't a loving relationship. It wasn't something where she was taught and treated with tenderness and gentleness. And then she has these children, and these children are not tender, kind children. The first gods that walked on the earth, according to the Greeks, were these titans. And titans, again, were not known for being a gentler, kinder group of people. People that you would aspire to be like. You know, titans, one of them was Medusa, and she had all those snakes coming out of her head. And if you happened to look at her, you turned to stone. Not exactly what you would think of as who you'd want to have as your brother or sister. But many times that's the kind of people that we feel we do have as brothers or sisters, because we can just feel they know us so well, they know how to shut us up immediately. Just that one look, and it can be like we are in Medusa's grip. Or sometimes that can even be how mother feels to us. Our mother can look at us and we can be completely together at other times in our lives, and we, at least for me, I come back home and it's like I slip back in time to a point of complete inarticulate inability to cope, to even speak. So how do we respond to those circumstances? Well, how did the mothers respond? Frequently, the mothers responded by simply loving the children that came into their lives. is it that we are willing to respond with simple love to what comes into our lives? Now, I may be speaking to a group of people who have it all together. So your lives unfold and you greet everything that comes to you with an open heart, with absolute welcome, with grace, with kindness, with peace, with gentleness. So I acknowledge, I see, and I value that. Sometimes you may be a little bit more like me, and you may have a little bit of a getting stuck in response to those things that come to you. You probably don't have it as much as I do. You probably have it far less than I do. That you work through these things more gracefully. There are many times that things arise for me, and grace seems completely outside of the picture. There's a Catholic prayer, Hail Mary, full of grace. The angel of the Lord comes to this young virgin, Hail Mary, full of grace. Warning, warning, there's a robot on Lost in Space where the robot would always let Will Robinson know that there's trouble. Full of grace. Mary should have run. That angel is showing up and she should have said, this could be trouble. You know, you are going to have the Son of the living God. Wait, how's that going to happen? I haven't hung out with any guys. I am engaged to be married. I don't know what you're saying. I don't know that I want to know what you're saying. It's all taken care of. Don't worry. It's all taken care of. One of the pieces about motherhood, that's a great example, is how do we open ourselves to be full of grace? The way Mary did it was she just said yes. She didn't ask for a plan. She didn't say, hey, Gabriel, before you go back to wherever you came from, I want to see the preview. You know, I really want to see some of the main things. Give me the script so I can read it over, talk it over with my agent, decide where we're going to go with this whole thing. Mary simply said yes. Sometimes I believe that the way to assume responsibility is to simply say yes. I see you nodding. Now, sometimes that simply saying yes does not feel in any way simple. Sometimes that saying yes, it pulls every last bit of courage from us to do that. How do we find the courage? Well, again, when the angel Gabriel showed up to Mary, he didn't say, here is the map, here is the way you're going to find your courage. How many times do mothers look for courage? Tan said it daily. It can be moment by moment. It can be second by second. When that child is running out into the middle of a busy street, and we all realize you can scream no, but the problem with no is that a lot of times it simply reinforces what's already going on. Do not think of any purple elephants dancing. Do not do it. I've set an impossible task for you. That command to not do something, by our very nature, our mind just goes there. Stop running! We're all running. That process invites us to find a new way to speak. Mothering invites us to find a new way to do things. You can no longer be what you were before. In all of the stories of the mother goddesses, there is an abrupt change from what was. A story that some of you may be familiar with, I've talked about it before, so people who have heard me. There's the story of Demeter and Persephone. And it's a classic story in the Greek tradition where Persephone is out gathering flowers. She loves the flowers. And Hades, the god of the underworld, has set a trap. One particularly appealing flower is going to open her to Hades. And she picks the flower and she is brought to his kingdom. And she's gone. Oftentimes, the story of motherhood also includes the story of loss. So in that story of Persephone, Demeter just thought the little girl was going out to collect flowers. And she was gone. Part of what it calls to be a mother is about letting go. I know that many mothers have a point in their child's lives which is their favorite moment, their favorite time. Some mothers just adore that place of infancy. Some adore that notion of that terrible two who is giving some resistance. Some adore the compliant child who has been characterized, I've heard it described, that you have the child who's very much like a dog, eager to please. What can I do? How can, their tail is wagging, they are excited by everything. And then there's the adolescent who's like the cat. You want what? You think I'm going to do that? I'm going to go do this instead. You value this? I'm going to claw it. Some mothers really like that adolescence because it can be an expression of rebellion that the mother hasn't had to have. Sometimes the mother loves adulthood because now they finally, their child is closer to a friend, closer to a companion. For each one of these times of love, though, nobody stays in that position. The infant, the toddler, the child, the adolescent, the adult, it all keeps changing. Now, unless I'm wrong, all of us have changed, correct? If you look back 10 years ago, would what's looking at you in the mirror be identical to what's looking at you in the mirror now? I'm hearing a kind of subtle agreement that it's not. So, if one part of motherhood is about just saying yes, the other part is about letting go. The ability to let go. Are we willing to let go? Sometimes what happens is we hold on so tight to that thing that we were that we cannot step forward into what we are. And by trying to hold to what we were and not seeing what we are, what do? Are we living? Not so much. We are caught between worlds. Mothers teach us how to be in the world that we're actually in. Carl Jung was a doctor, and he became a colleague of Sigmund Freud. He became a very well-known psychologist. He taught, after working with many people, about a whole notion called archetypes. One of the things of an archetype is that it's just a storyline. It's a character that just keeps showing up time and time again. The archetype of mother, the archetype of father, the archetype of daughter, the archetype of son, the archetype of worker, the archetype of lounger. There's all kinds of archetypes that he proposed and that he identified. The archetype of mother is one of the most powerful. It's a story piece that really finds its way in virtually any story. Whether we have biologically given birth or not, that mother archetype is always happening inside of us. And as we are living that mother archetype, we get to decide, are we going to be in that saying yes? Are we going to be in that letting go? Are we willing to step into the roles that that archetype calls from us? Now, what does all of this have to do with the still small voice? I said I'd make that connection. Okay, sometimes with the still small voice, we cannot decipher it. It comes in and it feels like an undecipherable code. Okay, there's some message here. If I sit still, I will understand it. Sometimes we can sit still and we just don't get it. And it can draw us to a place of fury. We can feel quite annoyed that this still small voice does not make itself clear.
Ever.
You know, it's like that Gabriel came to Mary and said, it'll all be fine. This is what's going to happen. It seemed pretty clear. However, it really wasn't. She didn't know what she was getting in for. She just said yes. Did she know that at 13 this kid was going to run away and he was going to run back to the temple after they had already gone? And she's like running around looking for him for days. Finally finds him and said, "Where were you?" It's like, "I went to my father's house." Now, it's a surprising thing that in the Gospels she is not referred to as boxing his ears for having run off like that. You know, she didn't go dragging him out. "I'm in my father's house." Well, who said you could go there? Did you ask for permission? You don't hear that. You don't hear that snotty tone that I'm conveying. Sometimes when we agree to motherhood and we agree to a plan, the code comes up with things that we just did not ever imagine as saying yes to. I said yes, but did it mean this? Did it include this? The question is, how do we embrace the yeses that others bring with them to our yeses? It's a tricky matter. Anytime we get into a relationship, suddenly it's not just our yeses, it's their yeses too. Ugh. And then there are all those arguments that come with that. What made you think to say yes? How could you have thought that? Didn't you know that I was attached to this yes? Well, yeah, I did. I figured you'd love me and you'd come along for it anyway. The yes is a much bigger prospect than many of us imagine. The yes of the mother is like that. So how do we keep recognizing that our one yes opens us up to a whole horde of yeses that were nowhere to be seen? That's part of that undecipherable code. That's part of how the still small voice plays with us. There's nothing in any of the religious, spiritual, historical, philosophical literature that says the still small voice is going to make you comfortable. If you listen to the still small voice, you will always feel good. There's no guarantee the still small voice is going to help me feel good. Feeling good has to be a choice that we make in response to the adventure that yes opens. Some of you have heard me say it before. The emotion of fear, what we're experiencing in our body, is the same emotion as excitement. It's just the label that we put on it. So how do we, like the mothers, tell the story? Do we tell it as a harrowing horror story? Do you know what it was like raising that kid? I thought he was going to kill me. Do we tell it that way? Or, you know what? I never knew what was going to happen with him. It was always an adventure. There was always something that I couldn't count on. And it would always leave me with a sense of, wow, what's next? The roller coaster of this child. This roller coaster of this adult. So part of responding to that still small voice is how we make the story about what it's doing. Somebody is very interesting. The other piece with respect to the stories of mother and how to respond, we've got the yes. We've got all of the adventures and all of the yeses the yes opens to. How do we accept the still small voice according to the stories of the mothers? A very famous story about mothers is the story of two women who came to a king. We've got this one baby. It's my baby. It's my baby. It's my baby. It's my baby. Her baby died. She slept on it. It's my baby. It's her baby. It's her baby. It's my baby. It's her baby. There was this big argument. Now, the king, being a thoughtful, kind-hearted person, says, well, let's just cut the child in half and we'll figure this whole thing out. You know. And according to one version of the story, when he says, let's cut the thing in half, the mother says, no, that's fine, keep it, it's fine, she can have it. The other story is, well, whatever, it'll be fine. That tells us a story that we end up creating two mothers. We end up creating the good mother, the sacrificing, all-giving mother, and the one who seems far less invested in the child. The one who's just like, oh, okay, whatever. We come up with stories about good and bad. Another interpretation of that story. There's a thing in Jewish tradition, that was one of the places where this story got picked up. And it got picked up as a story describing the wisdom of King Solomon. The story also comes about in Hindu tradition. And actually people believe that it's more associated with the Hindu tradition rather than with the Jewish tradition, because in the Hindu tradition, if you did not have the child, then you would not have access to the dead father's wealth. So the mother without a child, the motherless child, was the one who was going to go in want. Because in the old stories and in the old ways of dealing with people, widows and orphans were not the most highly valued groups in society. In that story, the one woman is willing to be both widow, and the other is willing to let there be an orphan. So rather than there being a bad mother and a good mother, sometimes we have to reinterpret the story. In the Jewish tradition, there's something called midrash, which is a way of looking at it and reinterpreting it. In that story, the notion is that one of the women, these two women, the one's husband has died, and it's the one's son has died, and her son was married to the other woman. Now, in that Jewish tradition, the older woman would have been the one who would have received the son of the son. I know, it's very strange. I can't account for it. The notion was that if she were to keep the younger son, that it would enable her to be respected and valued in the community. The other woman, if she would have to marry the older woman's, she would have to marry that child. And she'd have to wait a really long time. So if it's a child, then she'd have to wait. So that's why in the one story, the notion is that her saying, whatever, do whatever you want with it, it would really free her up, rather than having to wait and have her life put on hold for all that time. It would free her up. And it wasn't about her being the mother of that child. It was about her being the future wife of that child. Sometimes when we make a judgment about mothers as good or bad, the notion that only a self-sacrificing mother is the only kind that's a good mother. I mean, how many times have you heard that, the mother must always put her child first? And then any failure to put your child first makes you, it doesn't make you a good mother. It makes you a selfish mother. What if we stop passing these societal judgments on mothers? Let them off the hook. Really, and how is pulling out a sword going to be a testament of wisdom? I'm going to cut the baby in half. Wow, that was a stroke of genius. Why is violence deemed as the avenue to wisdom? The question is, how do we stop that violence against the mothers going forward from here now? How do we stop making those judgments, good mother, bad mother, and just love the mothers that there are? Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes our mothers said things and did things that we might not have liked. One of my mother's favorite lines is, well, it's just constructive criticism. It's just to make you a better person. I hated that line, constructive criticism. It just did not ever feel good. But I'm just telling you this so you'll be a better person. Well, what if I'm just good enough now? I didn't necessarily want to be a better person. Let me off the hook. As long as we make the judgment, good mother, bad mother, as long as we do that, how are we adding to the story? What if we are willing to say yes, like the mother? What if we are willing to let go? And what if, in that letting go, we release good and bad? Out beyond the field of right and wrong, there is a field. I will meet you there. What if we embrace the mothers as they are? What if we look at them with love, even if it's a love that we didn't necessarily receive? What if we give them back something different than what they gave us? What if we give into the world something forward, something that they taught us, but something that comes from a completely different place? That's my suspicion about how to interpret the still small voice. That to hold the still small voice is to release that almost automatic act of judgment. I'm inviting you to put up your dukes with the archetypes. And there's an archetype of good mother and bad mother. And to just say, look at this. I am facing the archetype of good mother, bad mother, and I get to name that I'm not going to simplify it so much. Because really, are any of us that simple? Can we look at any of our own choices and just very simply say, I'm good. I'm always good. We may always try to be good, and we may always have good intention. I'm participating in a group, and one of the big things in the group is recognize that your intention and what you do may be two completely different animals. So sometimes that judgment of good, that judgment of bad, doesn't even come close to what actually is. So, my 3 invitations for how to be with the still small voice as inspired by mothers are saying yes. And with that yes, it means the yeses that yes opens us up to. Doesn't mean we can't complain, doesn't mean we can't say, oh, I didn't realize it this. But just to say, I said yes, and it opens this. And I can put a story around this, I can put a story of adventure, I can put a story of horror. Which story serves me better? The action of release. The action of letting go, letting it be. That what we have loved, what we have most valued, may or may not continue. And that there will be changes. And that by releasing it, there is space for something else. And the last, the judgment, good or bad. Our brains are designed to see things in dualities. Well, just because they're designed that way doesn't mean we have to do it that way. Our mouths can be designed to say any number of cuss words. I think I've refrained from using them during this talk. We are at choice. We can choose whether we fall into that program of judgment and good and bad. And I also want to be using the spirit of the mother, the spirit of loving kindness. So you make a mistake. You make a judgment. You call it something bad. You call it something good. Okay. Move on. Let go. Let it be. And so it is.
And so it is.